The massive transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with a thunderous rumble that shook the entire docking bay of Kepler Station. Inside the ship, hundreds of beings from across the galaxy prepared to disembark. The annual intake of cadets for the Galactic Military Academy was always a sight to behold. General Thexvar stood at the observation deck, his four eyes scanning the new arrivals as they filed out in organized lines. His species, the Catherian, had run this academy for over 3 centuries. They knew military excellence when they saw it. Today, however, he was looking for disappointments. The first group to emerge was impressive, as always. 20 Vorthak warriors, each standing nearly 9 feet tall, their natural armor plating gleaming under the station lights. Their homeworld had gravity 3 times that of most inhabited planets, making them incredibly strong and durable. Behind them came the Zephyrians, their elongated heads pulsing with the soft blue glow that indicated active telepathic communication. These beings could coordinate military actions without speaking a single word. Next came the Synthoids, half-machine beings from the Outer Rim. Their cybernetic implants gave them perfect accuracy with any weapon and the ability to process tactical data faster than most organic minds could comprehend. The general nodded with approval. These were the kinds of cadets that made the Academy's reputation. Then he saw her. Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked off the transport with a simple duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, with brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. Her uniform was standard issue from Terra, with no visible modifications or enhancements. She looked around the docking bay with what appeared to be casual interest, not the awe that most species showed when first seeing the Academy. "That's the human representative?" asked Commander Zethka, Thexvar's aide. The lizard-like being's tongue flicked out in what could only be described as amusement. "She looks like she should be in a classroom, not a military academy." Thexvar checked his datapad. The file on Sarah Chen was remarkably thin. Born on Terra 24 years ago, served 2 tours with something called the Marine Corps. Unrecommended by her commanding officer for exceptional performance under pressure. No special abilities noted. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements. She was, by all galactic standards, completely ordinary. The humans insisted on sending someone, Thexvar replied with a grunt. Their government was very specific about participating in the exchange program, though I cannot understand why they chose this one. The cadets were being sorted into groups based on their species and specializations. The Vorthak formed ranks with military precision, their heavy footsteps echoing through the bay. The Zephyrians moved in perfect coordination, their telepathic link allowing them to function as a single unit. The Synthoids ran system diagnostics, their optical sensors glowing as they scanned their new environment. Sarah Chen simply stood in line with the other individual representatives, looking completely relaxed. She didn't seem nervous or intimidated. If anything, she appeared slightly bored. "Attention, cadets." Thexvar's voice boomed through the docking bay's speakers. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy. You are here because your species has identified you as their finest military specimens. Over the next 6 months, you will be tested, trained, and pushed beyond your limits. Many of you will fail. Only the best will graduate with full honors." The general's eyes found Sarah again. She was listening politely, but her expression suggested she'd heard similar speeches before. This irritated him more than he cared to admit. Didn't she understand where she was? This academy had produced the finest military leaders in galactic history. Generals who had conquered star systems, admirals who commanded fleets of 1,000 ships, special forces operatives who could infiltrate any facility in known space. Each species brings unique advantages to the battlefield, Thexvar continued. The Vorthak bring unmatched physical strength. The Zephyrians bring perfect coordination. The Synthoids bring technological superiority. You will learn to maximize these gifts while overcoming your weaknesses. He paused, letting his gaze linger on the human. Some of you may wonder why certain species are represented here, when their advantages are not immediately apparent. The Academy believes in giving every member of the Galactic Alliance an opportunity to prove themselves. However, proving oneself requires more than good intentions. Sarah Chen didn't react to what was clearly a pointed comment. She simply nodded along with the rest of the cadets. This only irritated Thexvar further. The orientation continued with the standard briefings about Academy rules, training schedules, and academic requirements. The cadets were assigned quarters based on their biological needs. The Vorthak required high-gravity environments. The Zephyrians needed chambers that could be sealed for their meditation periods, and the Synthoids needed access to charging stations and maintenance facilities. Sarah Chen was assigned to the standard humanoid quarters, which she accepted without comment. Her lack of special requirements was noted by several instructors as another sign of her unremarkable nature. Later that evening, the instructors gathered in their private briefing room to discuss the new class. The Academy prided itself on maintaining detailed psychological profiles of every cadet, and first impressions were crucial for developing training programs. The Vorthak contingent is exceptional, reported Combat Instructor Yarix. Their squad leader, Sergeant Gorthtown, has already organized them into an efficient unit. They'll dominate the physical challenges. The Zephyrians show remarkable potential for strategic thinking, added Tactical Analysis Professor Quindar. Their telepathic abilities will give them a significant advantage in group exercises. And the Synthoids have processing capabilities that exceed our simulation computers, noted technology specialist Velnara. They'll excel in technical subjects. General Thexvar waited for someone to mention the human. When no one did, he brought her up himself. What about Lieutenant Chen? The room fell silent for a moment. Instructor Yarix was the first to speak. She completed the physical assessment without difficulty, but nothing more. Average strength, average speed, average endurance. She didn't fail, but she certainly didn't impress. Her tactical thinking appears adequate, Professor Quindar added carefully. She completed the basic logic tests within the required timeframes. However, without telepathic abilities, she cannot match the Zephyrians' coordination capabilities. Technologically, she's practically primitive, Velnara stated bluntly. Her equipment is centuries behind current galactic standards. She doesn't even have basic neural interfaces. Thexvar nodded grimly. So we have confirmation. The humans have sent us their best, and their best is completely average by galactic standards. Why did they insist on participating? Asked Commander Zethka. Surely they must realize their limitations. Pride, perhaps, Thexvar replied. Or ignorance. The humans are relatively new to galactic civilization. They may not fully understand what military excellence means on a galactic scale. Unknown to the instructors, Sarah Chen was settling into her quarters with the kind of methodical efficiency that came from years of military service. She unpacked her few belongings, checked her equipment, and reviewed the Academy handbook that had been provided. Everything was exactly what she had expected based on her pre-deployment briefings. She had volunteered for this assignment, knowing full well that she would be underestimated. The Terran military leadership had specifically chosen someone who would appear unremarkable to alien observers. Sarah was good at her job, but she wasn't the most elite soldier humanity had to offer. She was, however, exactly what they needed for this particular mission. Her orders were simple: observe, learn, and demonstrate human capabilities when the opportunity arose. She was not to reveal the full extent of human military doctrine or capabilities unless absolutely necessary. The goal was intelligence gathering, not intimidation. As she prepared for bed, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Academy staff clearly thought they had the measure of her already. They saw an average human in an average uniform with average equipment. What they didn't see was 3 tours in active combat zones, 2 commendations for tactical innovation under fire, and a service record that included operations her own government still classified. The aliens were about to discover that average, for a human, meant something very different than they expected. But not yet. For now, she would let them think they understood her. The truth would come out eventually, probably when someone's life depended on it. That was usually when humans did their best work. The next morning would bring the first real training exercises. Sarah looked forward to seeing what the galaxy's finest military academy considered challenging. Based on her preliminary observations, it might actually be fun. She just hoped she could remember to hold back enough to keep things interesting. The first week of training at the Galactic Military Academy proceeded exactly as everyone had predicted. The Vorthak dominated the physical challenges, carrying twice their body weight through obstacle courses that left other species gasping. The Zephyrians excelled at tactical coordination exercises, moving as a single unit across complex battlefields. The Synthoids processed targeting data with machine precision, hitting targets that organic eyes couldn't even see. Sarah Chen performed adequately in everything and excelled at nothing. She finished her runs in the middle of the pack, scored average marks on written examinations, and lost most of her sparring matches against opponents with obvious physical advantages. The instructors dutifully recorded her mediocre performance and largely ignored her. This suited Sarah perfectly. During hand-to-hand combat training, she faced Sergeant Gorthtan, the Vorthak squad leader. He stood 3 feet taller than her and outweighed her by at least 200 pounds. His natural armor plating could probably stop small arms fire. When they squared off in the training ring, several other cadets stopped their own exercises to watch what they assumed would be a very short fight. Gorthtan moved with surprising speed for his size, but his attacks were straightforward and predictable. Sarah dodged his first swing, blocked his second, and spent the rest of the match staying just out of his reach. She didn't try to win, just avoided losing too quickly. When Gorthtan eventually pinned her, she tapped out immediately. "Good effort, Lieutenant," Instructor Yarrick said without enthusiasm. "You lasted longer than expected." Sarah nodded politely and walked off the mat. What she didn't mention was that she had identified at least 6 points where she could have ended the fight decisively. Gorthtan's species might be strong, but they had obvious weak spots in their armor plating. His fighting style, while powerful, followed patterns that would be easy to exploit after a few observations, but pointing this out would have raised uncomfortable questions about her training background. The weapons training was similarly frustrating for Sarah, though for different reasons. The Academy used standardized Galactic Alliance firearms that were certainly advanced, but operated on principles that were completely familiar to her. Point-aim fire. The targeting systems did most of the work. After a few practice sessions, she was hitting targets consistently, though not with the computer-perfect accuracy of the synthoids. "These weapons lack character," she mentioned to Cadet Zixtal, a synthoid she often found herself paired with during exercises. "Too much automation." "Efficiency is the goal," Zixtal replied, his optical sensors focusing on her with mechanical precision. "Manual targeting introduces variables that decrease accuracy." "Variables can be advantages too," Sarah said casually. "Sometimes you need to shoot around corners, or hit something the targeting computer doesn't recognize as a threat, or adapt when your systems get jammed." Zixtal processed this for exactly 0.3 seconds. "Such scenarios have probability ratings below acceptable thresholds for standard training." Sarah just smiled and went back to shooting. The synthoids were impressive, but they thought like machines. In her experience, real combat was rarely about optimal efficiency. The academic courses were the most challenging part of the program for Sarah, mainly because they covered alien psychology, galactic politics, and star system geography that wasn't part of standard human education. She studied diligently and managed to keep up, though her test scores remained firmly average. It was during tactical analysis class that she first caught Professor Quindar's attention for the wrong reasons. The exercise was a classic scenario. A small force needed to capture a fortified position held by a larger enemy. The simulation included detailed terrain maps, enemy force compositions, and available resources. Each cadet was required to present a battle plan. The Vorthak approach was predictably direct, frontal assault with maximum force. The Zephyrians proposed a complex flanking maneuver with perfect coordination. The synthoids calculated optimal firing positions based on detailed ballistic analysis. When it was Sarah's turn, she studied the scenario for a few minutes and then shrugged. "I'd wait for nightfall, have my people spread some rumors in the local area about our force being much larger than it actually is, then attack the supply depot 15 miles behind their main position. When they send troops to investigate, I'd hit their weakened fortress with everything I have." Professor Quindar stared at her for a moment. "That approach is not addressed in the tactical parameters of the exercise." "The exercise didn't say I couldn't do it," Sarah replied. "It just said I needed to capture the position. Easier to do that when the enemy is hungry, scared, and missing half their defenders. The simulation does not account for psychological warfare or extended operational time frames," the professor said stiffly. "Real battles usually do," Sarah pointed out. The exchange earned her a neutral grade and a note in her file about unconventional thinking patterns. Sarah wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but she filed it away as potentially useful information. Everything changed during the survival exercise in week 3. The cadets were divided into mixed groups of 6 and dropped on a hostile moon with minimal supplies. The environment was designed to test their ability to work together under stress. toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and dangerous native wildlife. Each group had 72 hours to reach an extraction point 30 miles away. Sarah found herself grouped with Gorthtan the Vorthak, two Zephyrians named Teleth and Morin, a synthoid designated Unit 47, and a reptilian saurian called Hisitak. On paper, it was a well-balanced team with diverse capabilities. In practice, they nearly died in the first 6 hours. The Zephyrians' telepathic coordination, so effective in controlled environments, was disrupted by electromagnetic interference from the moon's mineral deposits. Unit 47 sensors were scrambled by the same phenomenon. Gorthtan's strength was useful, but his heavy frame wasn't designed for the loose, rocky terrain. Hisitak's species was adapted for desert climates, not the Arctic conditions they faced. By hour 4, they were lost, low on water, and facing a severe drop in temperature as the moon's sun set. The group was arguing about which direction to go when the local wildlife decided to investigate the unusual electromagnetic signatures of their equipment. The creatures were called tunnel stalkers, according to their briefing materials. 6-legged predators with natural camouflage and a pack-hunting instinct. The first indication of their presence was when Unit 47 suddenly went offline, his optical sensors registering massive system failures before going dark completely. Defensive positions, Gorthtan bellowed, but there wasn't really anywhere to take cover on the exposed slope where they'd made camp. The tunnel stalkers attacked from 3 directions at once, their camouflage making them nearly invisible until they were close enough to strike. Sarah could see the group's coordination completely falling apart. The Zephyrians couldn't coordinate without their telepathic link. Gorthtan was swinging wildly at targets he could barely see. Hisitak was paralyzed by the cold. That's when Sarah stopped pretending to be average. Teleth Morin, get behind that rock formation and use your energy weapons to create a light grid, she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. Gorthtan, stop swinging and start throwing rocks at anything that moves. Stuck. Get to Unit 47 and see if you can restart his systems. You cannot command here, Gorthtan protested even as he followed her instructions. I am senior cadet. Right now I'm the one keeping us alive, Sarah replied, drawing her sidearm and putting 3 rounds center mass into a tunnel stalker that had been circling around to flank them. We can argue about chain of command after we kill these things. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, 6 tunnel stalkers were dead and Unit 47 was back online with his systems rebooted. The group had taken no casualties. How did you see them coming? Teleth asked, his blue skin still pale from shock. Movement patterns, Sarah explained, checking the bodies to make sure they were actually dead. They hunt in packs, which means they use coordinated attacks. Once you know what to look for, their camouflage isn't perfect. Your tactical adaptation was impressive, Unit 47 admitted, running diagnostics on his repaired systems. Sarah shrugged. It's what humans do. We adapt. The rest of the survival exercise proceeded much more smoothly. Sarah seemed to have an intuitive understanding of wilderness survival that complemented the group's various technical abilities. She showed them how to build shelters that conserved heat, how to find water in an alien environment, and how to move through dangerous terrain without triggering the sensitive wildlife. More importantly, she demonstrated something that none of the alien cadets had expected: leadership that transcended species barriers. She didn't try to be telepathic like the Zephyrians or analytical like the synthoids. Instead, she adapted her communication style to what each individual needed to hear in order to function effectively. When they reached the extraction point 12 hours ahead of schedule, their group was the first to arrive. General Thexvar was waiting for them personally, which was unusual for a routine training exercise. Report, he commanded as the group disembarked from the rescue shuttle. Gorthtan stepped forward as the senior cadet, but before he could speak, Unit 47 interrupted. General, we muster the atmosphere at the Galactic Military Academy shifted noticeably after the survival exercise incident. Where Sarah Chen had once been dismissed as an unremarkable human, she was now watched with curious interest by both instructors and fellow cadets. The change was subtle but unmistakable. General Thexvar had quietly ordered a review of all human military records available to the Galactic Alliance. What he found was puzzling. The humans had been involved in several recent conflicts, both internal and external, but the details were often classified or deliberately vague. Their tactical reports read like fiction, describing scenarios where numerically inferior forces achieved impossible victories through unconventional methods. The general had initially assumed these were exaggerations or propaganda. Now he was beginning to wonder. The first test of Sarah's new status came during Advanced Tactical Simulation Week. The exercise was designed to push senior cadets beyond their comfort zones by presenting them with no-win scenarios. Each cadet would command a simulated force against overwhelming odds, with their performance measured not by victory, but by how long they could delay inevitable defeat. The Vorthak typically excelled at these exercises through sheer determination, holding their positions through brute force until their simulated units were completely destroyed. The Zephyrians used perfect coordination to maximize their effectiveness, often lasting significantly longer than expected. The Synthoids calculated optimal defensive positions and resource allocation, achieving mathematically perfect efficiency in their defeats. Sarah's scenario was particularly brutal. Defend a strategic bridge with 30 soldiers against an attacking force of 300, armed with superior weapons and air support. Previous cadets in similar scenarios had managed to hold the position for an average of 18 minutes before being overrun. The simulation began at dawn. Sarah's defending force was positioned on high ground overlooking the bridge, with limited ammunition and no heavy weapons. The attacking force approached in textbook formation, using their numerical superiority to simply overwhelm the defenders through sustained assault. At least, that's what was supposed to happen. Instead, Sarah immediately ordered her forces to abandon the bridge. Professor Quindar, monitoring the simulation, leaned forward in alarm. "Lieutenant Chen, your objective is to defend the bridge, not retreat from it." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied calmly, her attention focused on the tactical display. "I'm defending it." What followed was unlike anything the Academy instructors had seen before. Sarah's forces melted away from their defensive positions, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they dispersed into the surrounding terrain and began what could only be described as a campaign of systematic harassment. Small groups of her soldiers appeared at unexpected locations, hitting supply lines, communication posts, and isolated units before vanishing back into cover. The attacking force found themselves controlling the bridge but unable to secure the surrounding area. Every attempt to advance beyond the bridge met with ambushes, improvised explosives, and sniper fire from concealed positions. "This is not standard defensive doctrine," Professor Quindar noted with growing confusion. "No, sir," Sarah agreed. "It's guerrilla warfare." The simulation was designed to last 30 minutes maximum. After 2 hours, the attacking force had taken such heavy casualties that their commander was requesting reinforcements. Sarah's original 30 soldiers had somehow inflicted over 100 casualties while losing only 7 of their own. "Pause simulation," General Thexvar ordered, entering the control room with obvious urgency. The tactical display froze, showing Sarah's forces scattered across a 20-square-mile area in a complex network of hidden positions and supply caches. The attacking force was bogged down in an increasingly desperate attempt to maintain control of what had become a hostile occupation zone. "Explain your tactical approach." "Lieutenant," Thexvar commanded. Sarah stood at attention. "The objective was to defend the bridge, sir. The attacking force cannot use the bridge if they're too busy fighting to survive in the area around it. As long as my forces remain active in the operational theater, the bridge remains effectively denied to the enemy." "Your orders were to hold the position," Professor Quindar protested. "My orders were to defend the bridge," Sarah corrected. "I'm still defending it. The enemy controls the physical structure, but cannot utilize it for strategic purposes. In practical terms, this fulfills the defensive objective while preserving my force for continued operations." Thexvar studied the tactical display for several minutes. The humans' approach was completely outside standard galactic military doctrine, but it was undeniably effective. More disturbing was the implication that this represented normal human thinking, rather than exceptional innovation. "Is this type of warfare common among human forces?" he asked. "It's one approach among many," Sarah replied carefully. "Humans tend to be flexible about definitions. We focus on achieving objectives rather than following specific methodologies." "Resume simulation," Thexvar ordered. "Let's see how this plays out." The simulation continued for another hour, before the attacking forces commander finally declared the operation a failure and ordered a retreat. Sarah's forces had successfully denied the bridge to an enemy that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Using tactics that seemed to come naturally to her, but completely baffled the alien military observers. Word of the exercise spread quickly through the academy. Within days, other cadets were approaching Sarah with questions about human tactical doctrine. The Zephyrians were particularly interested in how she coordinated her dispersed forces without telepathic communication. "It's about training and trust," Sarah explained during an impromptu discussion session in the common area. "Each unit knows their role and adapts to changing circumstances based on shared understanding of the overall mission." "But how do you coordinate without direct communication?" Teleth asked. "We use indirect signals, predetermined protocols, and individual initiative," Sarah said. "If a human soldier sees an opportunity to advance the mission, they take it, even if they can't ask permission first." This concept was revolutionary to species that relied on either rigid hierarchical command structures or telepathic coordination. The idea that individual soldiers could make tactical decisions independently, while still serving a larger strategic purpose, challenged fundamental assumptions about military organization. Unit 47 processed this information with obvious difficulty. Such an approach introduces significant variables into tactical calculations. "Variables can be advantages," Sarah repeated, echoing her earlier conversation about weapons training. "Adaptability beats predictability." The discussions continued throughout the week, with Sarah finding herself in the unusual position of informal teacher to cadets from more advanced civilizations. She shared human concepts like mission-type orders, where soldiers were given objectives but allowed to determine their own methods, and controlled aggression, where emotional responses were channeled into tactical advantages rather than suppressed. These conversations did not go unnoticed by the Academy staff. General Thexvar found himself reviewing human military philosophy with growing concern. The tactical manuals available to the Galactic Alliance were clearly incomplete, focusing on human equipment and organization, while completely missing the underlying principles that guided their approach to warfare. The real revelation came during the following week's War Games exercise. The annual Academy War Games were a major event, pitting teams of mixed-species cadets against each other in complex scenarios. This year's exercise involved capturing and holding multiple strategic objectives across a continent-sized battlefield. Teams would be resupplied and reinforced based on their performance, with successful units receiving additional resources while struggling teams faced increasing disadvantages. Sarah found herself assigned as second in command of Team Delta, under the leadership of Commander Vexith, a highly regarded Cytherian cadet from General Thexvar's own species. The team included representatives from 6 different species, each bringing their unique capabilities to the group. Commander Vexith's initial strategy was a textbook example of galactic military doctrine: establish secure communications, assign forces based on species capabilities, advance methodically toward objectives while maintaining clear command and control. The plan fell apart within the first hour. Team Alpha, led by a brilliant Zephyrian, achieved perfect coordination and seized 3 objectives simultaneously. Team Beta's Synthoid commander calculated optimal resource allocation and established an impregnable defensive network. Team Gamma's Vorthak leader simply bulldozed through opposition with overwhelming force. Team Delta, following conventional doctrine, found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and rapidly falling behind in the competition. "Request permission to implement alternative tactical approach," Sarah said during the first strategy meeting after their initial setbacks. Commander Vexith was clearly frustrated with their performance. "What do you propose, Lieutenant?" "Stop trying to fight them the way they expect to be fought," Sarah said simply. What followed was Sarah's first real demonstration of human military thinkport that lie. The emergency faculty meeting convened at Oro 300 hours, just 6 days after the War Games exercise. General Thexvar had called together every department head, senior instructor, and strategic analyst at the Academy. The subject line of the meeting notification had been simple and disturbing: reassessment of human military capabilities, Priority Alpha. "We have a problem," Thexvar began without preamble. "Our intelligence assessment of human military potential appears to be fundamentally flawed." The holographic display showed a compilation of Sarah Chen's performance records. Her individual scores remained frustratingly average, but her impact on group exercises was impossible to ignore. Every team she joined showed dramatic improvements in adaptability, innovation, and what the reports euphemistically called unconventional tactical effectiveness. The question before us, Thexvar continued, is whether Lieutenant Chen represents an exceptional human or a typical one. Professor Quindar activated his datapad. I've been analyzing her psychological profiles. Her responses to standard aptitude tests indicate normal human intelligence ranges. No exceptional traits in logical reasoning, pattern recognition, or strategic thinking. Yet, her practical applications of military doctrine consistently exceed predictable parameters, added combat instructor Yarix. Her tactical decisions appear almost random until viewed in context of their ultimate effectiveness. This suggests that human military training emphasizes different cognitive patterns than those measured by our standard assessments, Dr. Velnara observed. Their educational methodology may produce capabilities that our testing cannot detect. General Thexvar studied the assembled data with growing unease. I have reviewed available human military records. Their conflicts show consistent patterns of numerically inferior forces achieving victory through methods that standard galactic doctrine would classify as impossible or suicidal. Perhaps their records are exaggerated, suggested Commander Zethka hopefully. That's what I assumed, Thexvar replied, until now. The meeting continued for 2 hours, reaching an uncomfortable conclusion. The Academy needed to design specific tests to determine the true limits of human military capability. If Sarah Chen was representative of her species, then the Galactic Alliance's strategic assessments needed immediate revision. Design scenarios that will push her beyond her current performance levels, Thexvar ordered. I want to know what happens when a human faces truly impossible odds. The new testing regime began the following week under the designation Advanced Individual Assessment Protocol. Other cadets were told it was an experimental program to evaluate innovative training methods. Sarah was informed that she had been selected for intensive leadership development due to her recent exceptional performance. The first test was simple: individual combat assessment against progressively more difficult opponents. Sarah faced the Academy's combat simulators and escalating challenges. First, she fought against standard humanoid opponents with equivalent equipment, then against larger, stronger aliens with natural advantages, then against opponents with superior technology and weapons. She won consistently, but not in ways that made sense to the observers. Against the Vorthak-class opponent, she avoided direct confrontation and used mobility to strike weak points repeatedly until her opponent was worn down. Against the energy weapon-equipped adversary, she used environmental features to create cover and forced close-quarters combat where technological advantages were minimized. Against the armored opponent, she improvised weapons from the training environment itself. Her tactical adaptations are remarkable, Instructor Yarix noted during the review session, but they don't follow any documented fighting system. Because they're not supposed to, Sarah explained when asked. Humans don't train to fight specific opponents. We train to solve problems. Combat is just another type of problem. The second test escalated the complexity: squad-level leadership under impossible conditions. Sarah was given command of mixed species units and tasked with completing objectives that previous assessments had determined to be mathematically impossible. Capture a fortified position with insufficient forces. Evacuate civilians from a combat zone with inadequate transportation. Defend multiple locations simultaneously with limited resources. She succeeded at all of them. More disturbing than her success was her method. Sarah didn't try to optimize her forces for maximum efficiency. Instead, she identified what each individual could do best and built tactics around their personal strengths. She treated every challenge as a puzzle with multiple solutions and simply found the approaches that worked. Her command style is completely unstructured, Professor Quindar complained. She gives general objectives and allows subordinates to determine implementation methods. It appears to be effective, Dr. Velnara observed neutrally. Effectiveness isn't the issue, Quindar replied. The issue is that her approach cannot be systematically taught or replicated. It relies on individual judgment rather than institutional doctrine. Maybe that's the point, Sarah suggested when confronted with this criticism. Humans train individuals to think, not to follow procedures. Procedures break when you encounter something you haven't trained for. The third test pushed Psychological boundaries scenarios, designed to induce surrender or psychological breakdown. Sarah was placed in situations where victory was not just unlikely but potentially meaningless, protecting civilians who had been revealed to be enemy combatants, completing missions where success would result in greater strategic losses. Facing enemies who could not be defeated through conventional means, she refused to surrender in any scenario. More troubling, she found ways to redefine victory that accomplished strategic objectives even when tactical success was impossible. When protecting the revealed enemy combatants, she captured them for intelligence rather than abandoning them to die. When facing the lose-lose mission parameters, she identified third options that minimized overall casualties. When confronting undefeatable enemies, she focused on limiting their capabilities rather than destroying them. She appears incapable of accepting defeat, Dr. Velnara noted with clinical fascination, even when presented with scenarios where continued resistance will result in greater losses than surrender. It's not that we can't accept defeat, Sarah explained during the psychological evaluation session. It's that we define defeat differently than you do. Losing a battle isn't defeat if the war continues. Dying isn't defeat if your mission succeeds. Surrender isn't defeat if it serves a greater purpose. But surely there must be limits to human endurance, Dr. Velnara pressed. Sarah considered this carefully. Probably. I just haven't found them yet. The fourth test was the most extreme. Multi-layered strategic scenarios with cascading failure conditions. Sarah was placed in command of Academy resources and given objectives that required coordinating multiple complex operations simultaneously. The scenarios were designed so that success in one area would create problems in others, forcing impossible choices between competing priorities. The first scenario involved defending 3 separate installations with insufficient forces to protect all of them adequately. Standard doctrine required prioritizing the most strategic location and accepting losses at the others. Sarah instead identified that all 3 installations shared common vulnerabilities in their supply chains. Rather than defending each position independently, she organized a mobile force that struck at the attackers' logistics networks. By the time the enemy forces reached their targets, they lacked the resources to maintain sustained attacks on any of them. The second scenario involved a hostage rescue, where attempting to save the hostages would compromise a larger strategic objective. Previous test subjects had either sacrificed the hostages for the greater good or abandoned the strategic mission to save lives. Sarah found a third option that accomplished both objectives by redefining the timeline of the operation. Instead of treating them as simultaneous challenges, she created a sequence where success in the hostage rescue provided intelligence that enabled success in the strategic mission. Her approach to complex problems is unlike anything we've observed, Professor Quindar admitted reluctantly. She doesn't optimize for specific outcomes. She restructures the problems to eliminate conflicts between objectives. Is this a learnable skill? General Thexvar asked. Unknown, Quindar replied. Her methodology appears to be intuitive rather than systematic. The testing continued for 3 weeks, with scenarios becoming progressively more elaborate and impossible. Sarah's performance remained consistently exceptional, but not in ways that fit standard military assessment criteria. She didn't follow doctrine, she didn't optimize for efficiency, and she didn't accept the fundamental assumptions that the tests were designed to evaluate. Instead, she treated every challenge as an opportunity to innovate. The final assessment session brought together all department heads to review the complete results. The conclusion was as unanimous as it was disturbing. If Sarah Chen represented typical human military capability, then every strategic assessment of humanity needed immediate revision. The implications are significant. General Thexvar addressed the assembled faculty. We have been evaluating humans based on our understanding of military excellence. But human military excellence appears to operate on completely different principles. Their approach to the emergency klaxon echoed through Kepler Station at 347 hours, on what was supposed to be the final day of Academy examinations. Instead of graduating ceremonies and celebration banquets, the station found itself facing a crisis that would test everything the Academy claimed to teach. General Thexvar burst into the command center, still securing his uniform. Report! Terrorist attack on Meridian Station, Commander Zethka announced grimly. The Freedom Liberation Front has seized control of the civilian habitat. They're holding approximately 12,000 civilians hostage and threatening to detonate the station's fusion reactors. Response status? HFY demanded. Closest military units are 18 hours away. Station security was neutralized in the initial assault. The terrorists have military-grade equipment and appear to be well-trained. Zethka paused. Sir, we're the only response asset in range. General HFY felt his stomach sink. The Academy maintained a small security force, but they were instructors and support staff, not combat troops. The cadets were students, not soldiers. The situation was impossible. The terrorists' demands, he asked. Release of all political prisoners held by the Alliance, recognition of their independence claims, and withdrawal of Alliance forces from the disputed sectors. They've given us 6 hours to comply or they'll begin executing hostages. HFY studied the tactical display showing Meridian Station's layout. The civilian habitat was a massive structure with multiple levels, thousands of rooms and countless hiding places. Even with a full military response, a hostage rescue would be extraordinarily difficult. Sir, Zethka said quietly, they're requesting to speak with Academy leadership. They know we're here. Put them through. The main screen activated, showing a masked figure in military-style combat gear. General HFY, I presume. I am Commander Strike, speaking for the Freedom Liberation Front. State your demands, HFY said coldly. You've heard our political requirements, but we have additional terms specific to your situation. We know the Galactic Military Academy is conducting final examinations. We propose a test of our own. The terrorist leader gestured to someone off-screen. Send us your best graduating cadet, one individual with standard equipment, to attempt a rescue operation. When they fail, the galaxy will see that the Alliance's military elite cannot protect innocent civilians. This will demonstrate the weakness of your oppressive system. That's insane, Commander Zethka protested. Perhaps, Strike replied, but it's our offer. Send us one cadet for our entertainment, and we'll release 100 hostages as a gesture of good faith. When your champion fails, we'll begin executions as planned. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. It's obviously a trap, Zethka said. They want to create propaganda by defeating our best student in a public demonstration. Of course it's a trap, HFY agreed. But it's also the only option we have to save any lives before the military arrives. Who do we send? Zethka asked. HFY didn't hesitate. Lieutenant Chen. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the briefing room receiving what was technically her final examination. The irony wasn't lost on her that after weeks of artificial testing scenarios, she was facing a real crisis that would determine whether her mission at the Academy had been successful. The situation is straightforward, General HFY explained. 12,000 civilians, unknown number of terrorists with military equipment. 6 hours until they begin executions. Your objective is to rescue as many hostages as possible while minimizing casualties. Rules of engagement? Sarah asked. Whatever you deem necessary, HFY replied. The Alliance will support any actions you take. Sarah studied the station schematics on the tactical display. Meridian Station was a standard civilian habitat. Residential areas, commercial zones, administrative sections, and industrial facilities. The terrorists had seized control of the central command center and were using the station's own security systems against any response. I'll need a team, she said finally. The terrorists specified one individual. Zethka protested. They specified one cadet, Sarah corrected. They didn't say I couldn't have support from Academy resources. General HFY understood immediately. What do you need? Every graduating cadet who volunteers for an extremely dangerous mission with a high probability of death? Sarah replied matter-of-factly. All of them will volunteer, HFY said with certainty. I know, Sarah smiled. That's what makes this possible. 1 hour later, the transport ship approached Meridian Station, carrying what appeared to be a single cadet on a suicide mission. The terrorist leadership was monitoring all communications and had allowed Sarah's approach as planned. What they couldn't monitor was the pre-positioned equipment packages that had been launched toward the station during the previous week's routine supply runs. What they didn't expect was that Sarah's solo mission included support elements already en route via separate vectors. Sarah's first stop was the station's outer maintenance bay, where she accessed one of the equipment caches her team had positioned. Inside were tools that looked like standard maintenance equipment but had been modified for entirely different purposes. Phase 1 initiated, she transmitted, on a frequency the terrorists weren't monitoring. Establishing operational base. 20 minutes later, a maintenance worker's shuttle docked with the station's waste disposal port. The pilot appeared to be conducting routine garbage collection, and the terrorist sentries ignored him completely. Cadet Unit 47, wearing maintenance coveralls over his synthoid frame, began infiltrating the station's computer networks through supposedly secure waste management terminals. Phase 2 initiated, Unit 47 reported. Accessing station systems. 30 minutes after that, a medical emergency shuttle requested permission to dock. The pilot explained that they were responding to reports of injured civilians and needed to establish a triage facility. The terrorists, wanting to appear humanitarian for their propaganda broadcast, allowed the medical team to dock at the civilian medical bay. Dr. Hesutak and 2 Zephyrian medical technicians began treating genuinely injured civilians while establishing what appeared to be a medical station but was actually a command post for coordinating rescue operations. Phase 3 initiated, Dr. Hesutak transmitted. Medical cover established. The pieces continued falling into place. A food service delivery arrived at the commercial docking bay, carrying Gorthtan and 2 other Vorthak cadets disguised as food workers. A technical repair team gained access to the communication array, led by Teleth and Moran, using their telepathic abilities to coordinate with other teams without verbal communication. Within 2 hours, Sarah had positioned assets throughout the station while maintaining the appearance of a single-person infiltration mission. All teams in position, she transmitted to the Academy Command Center, beginning rescue operations. What followed was unlike anything the terrorist leadership had expected. Instead of a dramatic confrontation between their forces and a lone Academy cadet, they found themselves facing a coordinated rescue operation that seemed to be happening everywhere at once. The Synthoid team began systematically shutting down station systems that the terrorists relied on for control. Security cameras went offline in careful sequences that created blind spots for rescue teams. Environmental controls were adjusted to create distractions and confusion. Communications networks were selectively jammed to prevent coordination between terrorist units. The Vorthak teams used their superior strength to create new access routes through maintenance corridors and emergency passages. Walls that were supposed to be impenetrable barriers became doorways when Gorthtan and his teammates applied their species' natural construction abilities in reverse. The Zephyrian teams coordinated civilian evacuations with telepathic precision that allowed them to move large groups of hostages without verbal communication that the terrorists could intercept. Their medical training provided cover for accessing restricted areas of the station, and throughout it all, Sarah moved through the station like a ghost, appearing wherever the operation required leadership, coordination, or tactical adaptation. She wasn't trying to defeat the terrorists in direct combat. She was systematically dismantling their ability to maintain control. "This is impossible," Commander Strike snarled as reports flooded in of hostages disappearing from supposedly secure locations. "There's 1 cadet on this station." "Sir?" one of his subordinates reported nervously. "We've lost contact with Teams 7, 12, and 15. The hostages in Sections C, F, and J appear to have vanished. Find them," Strike commanded, but there was nothing to find. Sarah's teams weren't fighting the terrorists. They were avoiding them entirely. Instead of assaulting fortified positions, they were extracting civilians from unguarded areas. Instead of engaging in firefights, they were using stealth and misdirection to complete their objectives without alerting the enemy. By hour 4, over 8,000 hostages had been successfully evacuated, without the terrorist leadership realizing the scope of the rescue operation. The remaining civilians were concentrated in the most heavily guarded areas of the station, but Sarah's teams had gathered detailed intelligence on